So yeah, we have our CodeX Lunchtime Speaker Series this coming Wednesday, the 21st, and we'll be remoting that as well. It's here on campus at the law school, and so Dan Katz is our speaker. So please be sure to register for that. And then on Thursday, we will have our regular CodeX meeting, and I think it's, how do you say that? IRIS 2018, which is a live stream of a session from Salzburg, Austria, legal tech. So
it's a legal tech, very known legal tech event in Europe. It's been going on for I think over 20 years or so, and we'll do a live broadcast from there to. With a couple of people presenting their work, and so it should be an exciting session.
Yeah, CodeX does this every year. So fortunately, it's 1:30 our time and close to midnight their time. So we're definitely on the right end of that one. So busy week next week, and if you haven't yet registered for Future Law, registration is open, and please be sure to do that.
All right. So thank you. So with that. Short introduction, I will turn it over to Michael Hasday, who will present his paper on appellate court panel selection. And so without further ado, I'll turn it over to Michael. Michael, you still there?
I'm muted. Hold on. Oh, I'm unmuted. Hi.
Yep. We're getting you.
Hold on.
There you are. We can hear and see you now.
Oh, great. I just want to get my slides up. Hold on. Okay. Okay, great. Great. So my name's Michael Hasday. I'm an attorney from New York. I want to thank CodeX for inviting me to present my paper, The Rank Order Method for Appellate Subset Selection. In a nutshell, my paper presents a panel assignment algorithm that makes appellate court decision-making more accurate, fair, predictable, and consistent. And with that introduction, let's get to it. So appellate courts around the world use a subset of the entire appellate body to decide cases. These subsets are often referred to as panels. We're all familiar with the U.S. Court of Appeals, that uses panels of 3 to decide most of its cases. The Supreme Court of Canada, which has 9 justices, will also use panels of 5 and 7 to decide cases. And also the High Courts of Israel, South Africa, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom, as well as the European Court of Justice, all use panels. The obvious advantage of using panels is judicial efficiency. Obviously, you can decide a lot more cases if you have a small committee of judges deciding them, instead of having the entire appellate body decide each and every case like the current U.S. Supreme Court does, and they also decide very few cases. There are 2 main methods that appellate courts use to select their subsets, and that is a random assignment and direct selection. Random assignment is just how it sounds. The panel is randomly selected from the full appellate body. This is what the U.S. Court of Appeal mostly does. And there certainly are advantages to random assignment. First, it prevents the manipulation of panels for strategic purposes. Second, it allows for cases to be equally distributed to the judges. And third, it is arguably the easiest to defend to the public. But there is one big disadvantage to random assignment, and I call it its fatal flaw, and that is outlier panels. By outlier panels, I mean panels that simply do not reflect the views of the entire appellate body as a whole. It's easy to see how random assignment will produce outlier panels as a matter of simple probability. For example, if you take a 13-judge appellate circuit, you assume that 8 judges go for party A and 5 judges go for party B. There'd be almost a 1 in 3 chance for a party B panel to result. So what is so bad about outlier panels? Well, another way to phrase it is what's beneficial about representative panels, panels that sort of represent the views of the appellate body as a whole. Well, first, representative panels will have judges on it who have a diverse range of views, And there's a lot of academic literature that shows that this diversity of views leads to accurate decisions. Second, if you take the Condorcet jury theorem and you assume that each particular judge has a better than 50-50 chance to get the right answer, then a representative panel is much more likely to get the correct answer than an outlier panels. Outlier panels are also unpredictable. They create inconsistent jurisprudence, and they are generally thought to be unfair to the parties. The other method that appellate courts use to select their panels is direct selection. And direct selection is simply that the chief judge or court administrator simply selects the judges assigned to any particular panel. This is actually what the Supreme Court of Canada does. The Chief Justice simply selects the justices on any 5 or 7 justice panel. And the advantage of the direct selection method is that it does allow for representative panels if the Chief Justice selects that way. But the disadvantage, and what I call this fatal flaw, is judicial gaming or panel manipulation. There's nothing to stop the Chief Justice of Canada from selecting for a panel that reflects his or her own policy views, but don't reflect the views of the appellate body as a whole. So that leads to my proposal, the rank order method. My proposal aims to take the best elements of the random assignment method and the direct selection method, but avoiding their pitfalls. It does that through an algorithm that produces average panels. Another way to phrase that is it produces panels that are perfectly representative of the appellate body as a whole. And now I'm going to take some time to sort of go through this algorithm in some detail. So the first step is that the chief judge or court administrator decides for reasons of judicial efficiency how many judges should be on that panel. Then the chief judge or court administrator or committee of experts, hereinafter I'll refer to this as the ranker, rank orders the judges from the judge perceived most favorable to the appellant to the judge perceived least favorable to the appellant. And then matching panels are formed through the following 6 steps. First, you let X equal the number of judges in the appellate body. Second, you let N equal the number of judges desired on the subset panel. Third, you let Y equals N times X plus 1 divided by 2. And then in step 4, you form all panels where the sum of the ranks of the N judges equals Y. And in step 5, you eliminate certain panels in order to have judges equally or close to equally distributed among the panels. The precise algorithm for this step is in my paper. And then the final step, step 6, is you randomly select the panel for the panels remaining after step 5. So the reason this algorithm works is because the average judge is going to have a ranking of X plus 1 divided by 2. Therefore, the sum of the average judges is going to have the ranking of N times X plus 1 divided by 2, represented by Y in step 3 above. So to sort of illustrate how the rank order method works in practice, so let's use the example of the current U.S. Supreme Court. Let's assume there's just a 9-judge appellate body that decides cases in panels of 3. So here would be a reasonable ranking of the current 9 justices if you assume the appellant represents the liberal position and the appellee represents the conservative position. You would start with the ranking with Sotomayor, then Ginsburg, then Kagan, all the way to Thomas. Then per step 4, here would be the 8 panels that would form. You will note that the ranks of the sum of the ranks of each of these 8 panels equals 15. They all equal 15, and that because in this example, the middle judge will have a ranking of 5. So there's 3 judges on the panel, so 3 times 5 equals 15. So here are the 8 sort of panel 4, step 4 panels. Then per step 5, you eliminate a couple of these panels because the judges on these panels are overrepresented among the 8 panels. Here, you would eliminate panel 4 and panel 8, and then you might note of the 6 remaining panels, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, and 7. Each judge is on these 6 remaining panels twice. And then per step 6, you simply randomly select one of these 6 panels as the panel for that case. And then since each judge is on these 6 panels twice, each judge would have exactly a 1 in 3 chance to end up on that case. Okay. So this chart shows how the rank order method is good at eliminating the fatal flaw of the random assignment method, the fatal flaw of outlier panels. So here we see how how often a 3-judge panel under the assignment method and the rank order method will match a hypothetical en banc ruling for a 7-judge, 9-judge, and 11-judge circuit. So for example, let's take an 11-judge circuit that would hypothetically split 7 judges for party A and 4 judges for party B. Under the random assignment method, about 7 out of 10 of the 3-judge panels that result will be representative panels. There'll be panels that go for party A, while 3 of 10 will be outlier panels, panels that go for party B. Compare that to the rank order method. And so here, 9 out of 10 of the panels will be representative panels or panels that go for party A, and only 1 in 10 will be outlier panels, panels that go for party B. And it's important to note that even sort of these outlier panels that the rank order method produces are what I would call weak outlier panels. There'll be situations in which you have 1 judge, say, who will go strongly for party A, and then 2 judges who might just tepidly go for party B. And there's actually a lot of academic literature that in cases like those, the resulting 3-judge panel actually might end up going for party A just due to the intensity of the preferences. So even the outlier panels that the rank order method produces aren't outlier panels in their traditional sense. Okay, so this slide shows how the rank order method is good at eliminating the fatal flaw of the direct selection method, which is pattern manipulation or judicial gaming. So let's go back to the earlier example where we have a 9-judge, where the current U.S. Supreme Court, we assume, is a 9-judge appellate body that decides cases in panels of 3. And let's further assume that all, in this particular case, all of the justices would side with party A, except the 3 most conservative justices, Gorsuch, Thomas, and Alito, who would side for party B. So you'll notice, so these are the 6 panels that were left remaining after step 5. And you might note that each of these 6 panels, pursuant to the rank order method, they will all be representative panels that will go for party A, because in each of these panels, there are at least 2 of the 3 judges have ranks 1 to 6. But say they were using the direct selection method. Here, though, it'd be very easy to manipulate the panel to go for party B. Just the person making the selection would just have to stack that 3-judge panel with the conservative justices, and voila, you'll get a decision that goes for party B, even though the appellate body as a whole would side with party A. But under the rank order method, it is actually very hard to do this sort of panel manipulation or judicial gaming. Let's assume that the ranker really wants party B to win. The best that the ranker could do is to give himself or herself a 1 in 3 chance for party B to prevail. And to even get that 1 in 3 chance, the ranker would have to submit some sort of like crazy ranking where judges on the opposite ends of the political spectrum are ranked consecutively with each other, and everyone would know what the ranker is doing. And even going through all that trouble, you still only get a 1 in 3 chance for this to work. So just like the rank order method is good at eliminating outlier panels, it's also good at eliminating the problem of judicial gaming or panel manipulation. So I would just like to conclude. The rank order method, I hope I showed, is a middle ground between random assignment and the direct selection method. it takes sort of the best elements of the random assignment method and the direct selection method, but it avoids their pitfalls. I hope this can be the assignment method of the future. And I just want to end that I'm looking for someone to code this method, and I think this would be a great student project. Please, my email is on the slide, so please contact me if you're interested, and I would love to work with you. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Michael. Thank you for. So, what's your in terms of bringing about change? What's your strategy in getting the courts to use your method?
Right. Well, the first step is sort of a if you build it, they will come strategy. So that's why I'm looking for someone to sort of code this method so it's easy for a court to just put in the ranking. That is and then you sort of can advertise that. I mean, that is a great question, right? So that's the hard thing to actually, I just show that this is a more effective method, but how do you actually get the courts to implement it? That is a great question. I will note that in Canada, so historically, the reason they were able to have this sort of direct selection method is because they have sort of a apolitical culture. So you sort of need that for the direct selection method, but sort of the Canadian culture is getting more politicized. So it is going to be hard for them to sort of continue with the direct selection method, where the Chief Justice can just sort of select whoever they want for these panels. So I do think there is an opening where they're going to be looking for an alternative way to do that, because sort of that method is going to be untenable. But I am open to ideas for how to get the courts to implement it.
Great. And any other questions?
So, Michael, great presentation. I guess the only thing I can add would be we had a lunchtime speaker back in the fall of 2016 who works in Dan Bonet's cryptography group. And his name is Henry Corrigan Gibbs, and he uses cryptographic techniques to address the randomness issue. So to do something that he was calling fair randomness in legal process. And it was also about appellate court panel selection, and he had some interesting work at the time. I can shoot you his email address. It's publicly available if you're interested in digging into the cryptographic applications of this.
Yes, that'd be great, and I will please send me the email address, and I will send him an email to follow up. That sounds very interesting.
Sure.
Great. Anyone online have a question for Michael? You have to unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay, well, in that case, if there are no more questions, then yeah, thank you again, Michael, for joining us. It was great to have you. Thank you. We'll turn it over to R Street now, and Zach and Philip from the R Street Institute, and they will tell us about their work in tech and innovation policy and how it intersects with legal technology. So, actually, Michael, I think you have to unshare your screen.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Zach. I'm the Director of Technology and Innovation Policy at R Street, and my colleague.
Phil Wallach. I'm a Senior Fellow in Government.
And so we want to talk a little bit about some of our recent work on building technology expertise and capacity in Congress. So, moving away from, technology in the profession of conducting the law and talking more about technology in how Congress itself makes and how it oversees the use of technology in agencies. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is a paper I co-authored on bringing back the Office of Technology Assessment, which was an agency, is a congressional support agency that existed from 1972 to 1995. And
Zach, can I just interrupt for a second? Do you have any slides you want to share with us?
We don't have a formal slide deck. I can pull up some interesting things.
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. Please proceed. I just want to make sure.
That's our talking heads, I'm afraid.
No, that's okay.
But I'll try to not go too deep into the weeds here, and we can get into it in Q&A if it comes up. But so we authored a paper, as I said, on the case for bringing back the OTA and why the rising prevalence of debates over technology policy and the use of technology by government is sort of increasing in number. For instance, we've seen more bills and more mentions of artificial intelligence in this Congress than any previous. And there's increasing interest in building expertise in things like artificial intelligence and how the government uses it. And we think the OTA would be an important tool to help our lawmakers tackle some of these issues. So I can give a sort of a brief rundown of some of the history here. It was defunded in 1995 by Speaker Gingrich, who built as part of the Republican Revolution platform that they wanted to cut Congress first. So this was a matter of showing that they could tighten their own belts when they wanted to make big, drastic cuts everywhere else. So they thought that if they could cut their staffing levels and support agencies, that it would be more politically viable to cut school lunch programs and the like. So it was very much a creation of the sort of political reality of the time, rather than a deep principle or informed policy decision that they were pursuing. And this is largely no longer the case. There's a lot of interest, for instance, in reinvigorating the legislative branch by staunch conservatives like Senator Mike Lee. And so a lot of the members and staff who voted to kill the OTA are no longer there. Many of the ones who were there at the time didn't necessarily agree with it and were strong-armed by leadership into gutting this, what has been called by some Congress lobotomizing itself. So what we are looking at is the sort of case for bringing it back. There's been a few attempts to do so. We think the opposition is sort of not insurmountable, and it's an increasingly, we think it's increasingly important to look at how we can build these institutions and enable our policymakers to make more informed decisions on these increasingly complex and technical issues. So that's basically an overview of our paper. You can, we'll send it around to the listserv afterwards. And I think this also ties into a number of other efforts here we work on here at R Street on building capacity in the legislative branch. Phil, if you want to talk a little bit about some of yours.
Sure. So to be clear, the paper Zach was just talking about, he co-authored with Kevin Kozar, our colleague here, who's the vice president for policy here at R Street. I co-authored a paper with Kevin a couple of years ago called "The Case for a Congressional Regulation Office," which maybe gets at a lot of the same concerns, but from a different angle. So rather than resuscitating Office of Technology Assessment, which, as Kevin likes to point out, is actually still easy. You could just refund it and it would spring back to life. But we propose in this other article to build a new congressional support agency called the CRO, Congressional Regulation Office, that would be modeled more like the Congressional Budget Office, in that it would have an independent director and a professional staff. It would not have any legislators acting as board members or anything like that. And the idea would be sort of to be a trusted broker for complicated issues around regulation, which Congress really gets wrong an awful lot now. And a lot of that reason is because of technological issues that they don't understand. So it would be, the idea would be to build a lot of scientific expertise into the agency, different, have occupational health experts, environmental health experts, you know, Silicon Valley types to deal with cybersecurity, to get sort of trusted brokers in each of those things. We can never really expect Congress to have sort of expertise equivalent to the executive branch. It's just a matter of arithmetic. The legislature is tiny in comparison, but it's a matter of Congress even knowing who to ask on the outside. And so the idea would be you have to build a trusted body that acts as an intermediary for Congress to go out and find the right kind of experts who it's going to be willing to trust. And so I think that's really the key in thinking through these issues. I mean, the Office of Technology Assessment, I would be a little bit less, I think Zach's account of why it died emphasized politics less. You know, the Republicans coming in 1995 talked a lot about cutting government, and certainly that was a real policy motivation for them. But they also were just playing power politics. They really had the perception that the Office of Technology Assessment was against them, was politically biased, and so they took the chance to kill it and used sort of tightening their belts rhetoric as a justification. You know, the Speaker Gingrich came in and killed a lot of other intramural organizations in Congress also, and the motivation was really consolidating power in the Speaker's office. So I think you have to make a pitch to build an agency that withstands political changes. You know, the Congressional Budget Office has been remarkable in that regard. It really relies a lot upon the mystique of economists and the ability of economists to be neutral, which maybe is not quite as robust as it used to be. But it's endured, and it looks like it will probably continue to endure today. So I think the idea would be, for whether you had a resuscitated Office of Technology Assessment or a Congressional Regulation Office, you have to concentrate on that. How does it actually become a trusted broker that both parties, and I guess the Republicans in many ways are the harder sell, are going to be willing to rely upon? The other thing I'll say is my feeling. I've only been out to Stanford once and talked to some students there, and it was kind of amazing to me how little they thought about Washington. They sort of were very confident in the sense that all the action was out there in the Bay Area, and what happened on that other coast was of little consequence to them. And so I think for some in the technology world, there's a temptation to just try to forget about Congress, like it doesn't really matter. And I would say that, you know, even if your view of our current crop of legislators is not too rosy, I would say just as a negative threat, Congress really needs to be taken seriously. Congress really has to respond to technological changes by updating a lot of the regulatory statutes on the books. They won't really, you can't just keep running on the same things for 20, 30, 40 years when the technological landscape is completely different. And that's often what the executive branch tries to do today. And it's really pretty dangerous. And if we don't find ways to get Congress well informed on the issues that it's going to have to legislate about, it will legislate badly, and it will screw things up. So I think it's something that people out there in the Bay Area and Silicon Valley need to think more about. And I think, to be fair, they are directing a lot more resources today than they were a decade ago, let's say. So it'll be interesting to see whether we can figure out a constructive way to build capacity into Congress. Our street in general, we're not just interested in the technology issues. We have a group called the Legislative Branch Capacity Working Group that meets with Hill staff and various academics and think tanky types. You can find those videos of those meetings at our website, which is legbranch.com.
And there's one on OTA, and there's one, I think, on the CRO, right?
There's one of me trying to sell the CRO. There's one all about Office of Technology Assessment, which is a really good one. So look them up, and we're glad to
field any questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. So I think it'd be helpful to understand a little bit more about what the role was of the OTA. I mean, you're saying you sort of envision this as taking on a role as a neutral broker. What exactly does that mean? And how is this organization safe from capture from industry interest?
So I think there's a couple of reasons why it would be unattractive to be captured in the way that people talk about the Federal Communications Commission or other regulatory agencies. Part of it is just that it is not a regulatory agency. It has rules. It produced long, somewhat dull reports with a lot of sometimes original quantitative analysis. And part of this was it would provide a menu of options to lawmakers rather than advocating in the way that other think tanks here might say, vote for this bill. Instead of doing that, they would say, well, here's 5 options and the sort of pros and cons associated with that. As far as being bipartisan, it was sort of structured that way. It had something called the Technology Assessment Board, which was made of 6 members from each party that would approve projects, including final reports. It would set up an advisory entity on each major project that would bring in outside academics as a sort of peer review function. So it had a lot of sort of checks that would ensure its ability to remain neutral, which is especially important in the later years of OTA. If you dig into its history, it got into some trouble, in its earlier years in how it played politics within Congress. And then otherwise, I think if you look at a lot of the other support agencies within the legislative branch, they're also, the Congressional Research Service, or CBO, as Phil mentioned. These are not entities that are known for being captured or for having a revolving door with cases. And they're, more the kinds of people they staffed with was, more experts and academic types rather than political operatives for the most part. So it had a pretty good strategy, I think, of approaching neutrality. There are certainly some structural changes that might be warranted. Phil, I don't know if you have any other thoughts.
Yeah, well, capture is in the eye of the beholder, of course. I think Republicans in 1995 would have been perfectly happy to say that the Office of Technology Assessment was captured by a bunch of left-wing academics. And the trust problem between Republicans and academia today is profound. So it's a challenge figuring out how you can thread that needle, to be sure. I would think bringing in, you would need to bring in a combination of academics whose reputations preceded them and sort of technologists and industry experts who, again, have a reputation for even-handedness. Like I said, I think the CBO's model has really been sort of, let's get top-notch PhD economists, let's get people with real reputation for fairness. I think that the original director of CBO, Alice Rivlin, had a lot to do with setting up a culture there that very carefully avoided taking any policy stances such that it could keep itself disentangled.
And what makes you so optimistic that political climate at this point might be susceptible to rebuilding the OTA, given that there are large swaths of the legislature that actually don't believe even in global warming. What, you know, not to be a cynic or pessimist, but what signals do you see that make you feel like there's an opening now?
Sure. I mean, you know, at least in the House side, there have been a few votes where we got to see how people have come out on this. There have been various efforts to try to revive the OTA over the years. And as Phil mentioned, it also does remain in statute, and so you could do this through an appropriations bill, which is a little bit easier for a few reasons, depending on who the chairman are. And so there were a number of significant Republican proponents. You know, the chairman of the House Science Committee, Jason Chaffetz, Blake Farenthold. There are a number of Republican supporters. We talk about this a little bit in our paper. We also see that, you know, in our private conversations with staff, certainly there are political challenges, but you know, we've gotten a lot of sympathy talking with, you know, many Republicans on the Hill about this idea. And furthermore, we see the potential, you know, the political dynamics within Congress may shift in the next few years, and that could create an opportunity for bringing back an entity like the OTA.
Great. So Ruben has a question here. Yeah.
Well, so I wonder if advice is only as useful as the actions they influence, and if the parties in question aren't perhaps as open-minded, let alone interested in funding more information or what they might perceive to be more noise, I wonder if there is a way to force one's way in through the mechanisms that give those individuals influence in the first instance. So, for example, people exist in the world that understand this stuff. Many of them are already paid quite well. Why not create a mechanism to gather a meeting of the minds with the obvious bias, with the declared bias of the individuals and the institutions that they represent, and create something really simple that just says, look, here's a piece of technology, like the questions of the community, the questions that the government might be asking, send that question to this email address, those people can answer, and then all of that back and forth is just public, right? And also goes to XYZ journalists. It's free, you can't defund it, and everybody involved, for whatever narrative they might have, at least there's a few people in the room. Do you know what I mean? And the issue being that if that is ignored, right? If you're sending emails saying, hey, don't do the thing, or you should do this thing instead, and the press might sort of see that and see that it's being ignored, that may create a distance, like a malincentive to making decisions which might harm, which one presumes is the intent for this purpose of the conversation to avoid poor decision making. You know what I mean?
I mean,
like, is there a way to externalize this mechanism?
The kind of sort of openness at every stage that you've just prescribed does not mesh well with the Washington culture. And in an age when people think that, you know, everyone is just waiting to use their emails against them and turn them into unflattering headlines, I think that it's not the way to build trusted relationships. I just don't see legislators wanting to get involved with something where all of their communications just instantly show online for all of their critics to mine. So I think there's a lot of logic to building things within the legislative branch itself. It needs to be a co-equal branch of government. It is the first branch of our constitutional system, and it really needs to build its own institutional capacity. And so I try to appeal to their pride. That's sort of my source of optimism, is to say a lot of people over there now are pretty disgusted with themselves at exactly sort of how disreputable the institution as a whole has become, how feckless they feel to address a lot of these complicated issues. So my sense is you sort of appeal to their pride and say, hey, you need to be punching at your weight class that you haven't been doing in a long time. And so build it for yourselves. And I think then you have the ability to interface. It's sort of who do you trust? You may, the way you made it sound like it's just send it out into the internet and get back great answers that you can trust. But I'm not sure who exactly you're sending your query to out there in the wide world, where there's obviously so many charlatans.
Well, there is some, like, I think an analog, I think might be the, what's it called, the peer-to-patent community that has arisen, trying to kind of validate, good, identify prior art that might keep patents from being registered on a patent office. So that's sort of a community of experts. I don't know exactly how they brought the right people together, but that's a mechanism that goes a little bit in that direction. But Bruce, you had a point.
So I was pretty active in the federal technology sphere in the 90s, and there were a number of incidental movement factors that I haven't heard you talk about that may or may not be helpful. First, you had a CIO council. You had a Chief Financial Officers Council. You had OMB OIRA, the Office of Information Regulatory Affairs, through which not only that wonderful paperwork reduction notice accompanies our tax forms, but they actually had to sign off on every agency's IT plan and the spending. You had congressional oversight in the government reform House Reform Committee, which I testified before on geospatial. So there was a lot of attention somewhat before the internet age in terms of GovTech and in terms of the capacity to frankly blow it and bastardize the IT budget of the country by having everybody run off and create new, of the same. So instead of centering this on an OTA and let's bring back an old friend that we loved, I would look at the technology spend of the federal enterprise. I would look at the share and savings program that was in GSA and defuncted after 2005, let's say, where if you found a form of waste in technology spend, you reported it and you got like a bounty for doing that. I would look at, in effect, what was around the OTA's, incubation, and see if you upgraded it to our, iPhone digital age with Facebook, what in fact you would come up with. My work for FGDC and OMB focused on the spending by the federal enterprise in redundant ways. So, for example, the fact that we have increasing incidents of disasters drawing down the FEMA's flood response insurance fund is a good reason to say it'd be nice to update the 25-year-old out-of-date flood maps so that you don't reposition people in the path of the next flood. Those are technology conversations that speak directly to Congress's domain, which is money and responsible stewardship of the federal purse. So rather than the OTA as a form of the cousin of the fiscal responsibility, go directly to analysis, and here's where you could have a crowdsourced knowledge of all of the ways the federal government wastes and misses opportunities by over-speccing custom bespoke systems and all the nonsense that is in the FCW, the Federal Computer Week, every week. So follow the money. That's what needs to be done here, I think.
So I know hardly anything about these internal government IT questions. There are a lot of people who study these. We had one of our working group sessions specifically on this question of government's own technology use and Congress's technology use even. So that's on the site if you go looking for it. But I certainly think, you know, there's a cottage industry of consultants, maybe it's bigger than a cottage industry, who spend all their time going in and fiddling with these government technology systems. I'm perfectly willing to believe that they make a hash of it, but I don't know much about it.
I mean, so there is a big initiative from the White House on federal IT modernization. I don't believe this extends to the legislative branch, which tends to run its own backwards in different ways kinds of systems. There's an emerging technologies division at the GSA that's doing a bunch of interesting things. One point of engagement is they're redoing the National Action Plan for Open Government, which takes some input from the public. There's also a comment period on the Trump administration's IT modernization plan. There may be another round as well. And so these are interesting. These are definitely like interesting issues. The GAO has done a bunch of work studying different kinds of antiquated technology and waste and talking about the different procurement rules, which is, again, a little bit out of my comfort zone when you start talking about the federal acquisition regulation. But there's certainly, you know, areas ripe for looking at how modernization can cut abuse. The OTA, notably in its day, played a big role in modernizing the Social Security Administration's IT infrastructure, which can help save a bunch of money. And the GAO itself also has a sort of mini OTA-like function in it today, which has some different technology assessments, although at a much smaller scale. And there's a variety of reasons why the GAO may not be the ideal entity to perform that function. But anyway, how's that felt?
Great. Does anyone have another question for Zach?
I guess I could chime in. This is Susan. I guess to the extent that Washington abhors a vacuum, I imagine that a lot of the current vacuum is being filled by Silicon Valley technology giants and others who love to lobby in these areas, right? So, you know, part of their advocacy program, they've become like the trusted brokers, right? I can only imagine this kind of thing is going on. How would you suggest, I mean, could there be a way, I mean, is your vision something like maybe you have like an advisory council of these technology giants that would then perhaps help get a sort of like an elite team of technology minds together, a la what Megan Smith and Jen Pahlka did in the executive branch under the last administration?
So you're talking about building new advisory entities in the legislative branch? Or?
Yeah, I mean, is that, I'm just trying to understand your vision, because I'm trying to think like who's filling that void now and what would be the bridge to your vision of what would work.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of like how, say, congressional staff have access to technology expertise. Now you mentioned companies. Certainly there's, all of them have lobbyists that are presenting their side of the world. Think tanks perform a role and
right.
Talking and providing expertise.
Google and Facebook are big funders of think tanks now, including here.
And
right, so they're the trusted brokers right now. This whole ecosystem, yeah.
But they're certainly trying to fill the space.
They're certainly making more rounds on the Hill than nonprofits are, and certainly have a perspective. Sometimes, often they have very, deep experts on these things that don't always present a objective perspective. On some of these emerging technology issues. I mean, they're paid to talk about what will benefit your company, right? And
can you actually, on that note, can you sort of give us an example for a specific policy or legislative project that would have benefited from sort of the OTA's kind of scientific expertise, and that sort of,
right,
didn't result in an ideal outcome?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a lot of these there's a number of like sort of intractable technology debates that are going on today. We talk about the debate over encryption and going dark in the paper. The debate over, online copyright enforcement is one where I think they'd benefit from more expertise. You see a lot of these legal frameworks for these issues have come out sort of in the 90s. Not saying OCA caused all of them, but things like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act and Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act and the Email Privacy Act are kind of all this sort of late 80s to late 90s period. Providing some like forward-looking legal frameworks that enabled a lot of the sort of success we have in online platforms and the digital economy. So I mean today people are debating the artificial intelligence and automation. They're thinking through how do we create a legal framework for autonomous vehicles, and more abstract than that, how do we define artificial intelligence as a regulatory subject, right? There are a couple bills out now that are trying to do that. But enshrining a definition in statute prematurely could have consequences down the road. It could be overly broad. It happened, for instance, in Nevada when they were writing their self-driving vehicle legislation. They had to go back and update it. And so we think generally that as these cybersecurity is another issue, and in the executive branch side, we've seen a number of federal advisory committees coming in and issuing reports on what to do, but they're often involving the same corporate.
Well, and I think there's obviously just a question of the executive branch being a self-interested actor in all of these things too, where there's an awful lot of cybersecurity capacity built into the NSA
right.
and the FBI and all those places, and Congress just doesn't. Our intelligence briefing process is obviously not working too smoothly right now. It would make a lot of problems easier to tackle if you had internal capacity.
And there's value in having internal analysis, even if it has some redundancy with the executive branch. They may not, for instance, want to rely on the word of the intelligence or law enforcement communities on an issue like electronic surveillance. And they may want their own analysis to check, claims that the executive branch is making on a variety of issues. And so there is a benefit, we think, to having that structurally embedded rather than, deferring to partisan think tanks or industry lobbyists, although there's certainly a value in having both of those voices. It's not, I think, sufficient in itself.
Mm-hmm. All right, Scott.
I noticed that the mission of the R Street Institute is policy research and to promote limited effective government. And I'm aware of, Bruce just shared cookies with us, and that there's a degree of openness on the internet still, one could argue, that reverts to all these companies and technological processes are getting on the end user are cookies. There are other checks and balances out there. Companies sort of may provide a kind of de facto surveillance on their users. But I'm also aware of John Perry Barlow, who just passed away, one of the founders of the EFF, Electronic Frontier Foundation's Declaration of Freedom of Cyberspace. And we still have a degree of freedom in cyberspace, I would think, that a focused, limited, effective government approach might need to add to in terms of possible further constitutionally mandated agency. This is a little bit of a broad question, but I'm curious how you would add the international aspect of the web in its 200 country focus, or however many sovereign states there are out there, in terms of adding effective government in policymaking at the R Street Institute. This is a very broad, idea-oriented question, but what would the effective add be on top of the CTO with a new agency that would create further ways of making AI, machine learning, robotics, for example, surveillance, more robust from a governmental perspective?
I mean, just to kind of iterate on that question, I think with many of those technologies having a global reach, would the OTA that you're proposing, would that be accessible also to experts from other countries?
Right. So first I'll mention that on John Perry Barlow, one of my colleagues was the first counsel at EFF and wrote a really great piece for Tector, remembering Barlow and commenting on how the Declaration of Cyberspace Independence has aged, which arguably is not very well, although we also are very sympathetic to its ambition. As far as internationally, a notable thing about OTA is a lot of foreign legislative bodies copied it as a model and have their own divisions that were modeled on OTA. So as far as our proposal, we would hope that as it was originally, its reports would be available to the public in an electronic form. Part of its history was largely before the digital era. Another side note, an issue we work on is promoting the transparency of Congressional Research Service reports, and CRS has been somewhat resistant to making its reports available, although we have a handy website we collaborated on called everycrsreport.com, where you can go get them all mirrored from a congressional server. And,
they presented.
So Zach, I have, it's Bruce again. I have one more question.
Final point, amount of time.
Yeah, of course. In conversations with a senator who's been very much featured in the news for the Russia investigation, I asked him, how do you figure out the consequence of funding and defunding stuff on the Hill? And the answer was predictable. We have no idea what the relationship between defunding education and uppfunding public safety. So I think if there's a way to demonstrate to Congress in its own functioning the bizarre nature of hiding the ball that could be revealed through using AI, through using some of the deep learning opportunities around the federal budget, because of the balkanization in the subcommittee process, and actually bringing that collective intelligence of what happens on the Hill together in unique ways, that also would be a selling point for the OTA. Now, I don't say that the lobbyists would enjoy that, but the American public might.
Yeah.
Any response to that? Or?
No.
Yeah, I mean, so the appropriations lobbying is its own esoteric world relative to much of what else goes on within Congress. Much of it is not particularly salient when it comes to members going back to their districts and explaining to their constituents, especially when not concerning things that directly benefit the district. As far as OTA, it could be done, through the legislative branch appropriations subcommittee bill.
I mean, the amounts of money to actually build this capacity are so trivial compared to the overall federal.
There are many
You've sidestepped the point. If you want the OTA, make the OTA do something useful that Congress isn't doing for itself.
Right.
Beyond being a place where you get a degree in technology assessment?
Yeah. One thing that you could build capacity to do, which Congress conspicuously lacks right now, is to run its own independent cost-benefit analyses of different regulatory rules.
There you go.
So you have OIRA nested in the White House.
Mm-hmm.
It's not an independent agency. It's ultimately working pretty directly for the president. And so one big sales pitch is, hey, Congress, you need not just to be blindly trusting these, you ought to be running your own. You need to hire a bunch of people who can do that for you, at least on the most important rules. So whether you would build that into an OTA or a congressional regulation office, that's one sales pitch, I think.
All right, so we'll have to wrap it up here. What's a good way to reach you guys if anyone has sort of a follow-up question?
Sure. So you can go to our website, rstreet.org, the letter R and then the word street. And our emails and cell phone numbers are available there. And we can also see about sending around our contact information in both of the papers. Yeah.
All right. Okay, well, thank you again. It was great to have you. And thank you everyone coming to the meeting today. And we'll be meeting again next week. Again, Wednesday is Dan Katz, right?
Yeah,
And
Wednesday
Thursday is
Dan Katz, Thursday our regular Thursday CodeX meeting.
Okay, all right. Thank you all. See you next time.